Hello there, I'm Jared, and today I'm going to show you how I made this shot for May 4th. Okay, so here's what the original footage looks like. So the first step to doing any visual effects shot like this is to do what's called camera tracking. Camera tracking, for those of you who don't know, is essentially where we are telling the computer how the camera is moving. So that way we can put in 3D objects and things that don't exist into our shot and make it look like it was actually there. If you see the camera filters on some social media apps, like Instagram for example, there are some filters that let you put a 3D object into the shot and make it look like you're actually recording it, even though it's not there to begin with. That is essentially what camera tracking is. The difference here though is that we're not doing it in real time, we're doing it after the fact that we have recorded our shot. So typically you want to record with steady motion so that it's easy for the computer to understand what is happening. You don't really want a lot of crazy jittery movement, otherwise the computer's gonna have a very hard time keeping up with that. So straight off the bat, we have a big issue. We have some complicated camera motion happening in this shot. We start off looking at one angle, and then about halfway through the video, we are rotating the camera super fast, and we are looking in a completely different direction. It's totally different scenery, and there's just a lot happening. So how do we work with a shot like this? How are we going to put visual effects into something that's pretty much impossible to camera track? I'm going to tell you my little secret. We're going to split our shot into two different sections. In other words, we don't need to camera track any parts where we don't have the ships showing. There's no point, there's no visual effects. So we know we need to see the ships for the beginning part of the shot where they come into view and they're going to fly by. So we only need to track for that portion. The second part will be after the camera settles down and we're looking from that new different view. Because there's not a lot of camera movement happening there, we can get away with that and it'll act like its own camera solve. The trick here is that we're not tracking anything for the middle portion because we don't need to see anything, so why bother? In the end, the way this is going to work is we're going to have two different tracks, but when we combine them together, it'll create one seamless sequence. So this camera tracking method I've actually used before in the past. About a year and a half ago, we made a video called Battle for the Cookie, and there's a specific shot in the video where Pikachu is seen on our kitchen floor, and my brother Caleb walks past the camera. For those few frames where he walks in front of a camera, there's nothing there to track. But I figured, why track anything? Because we're not going to see Pikachu, why do we need to track anything? So I used the same method there where I split that single shot into two different tracks, and when you combine them together, it creates one seamless sequence. This is super technical. I know it sounds complicated. I hope I'm not like scaring you with all this information. I'm just kind of throwing out my method for how I approach this. Hopefully I'm explaining it well. I don't know, but anyway, moving on. So like I said, we're only camera tracking the portion that we need. We don't need to camera track anything from the middle portion. So what we can do is we can cut off a timeline right before the camera's about to go into its crazy motion, and that's it. That's the first portion of the shot. That's all we need for that section. So as you can see, now we have a very nice camera track. Nothing's too crazy. You know, obviously you gotta do a little work to clean tracks up and get everything looking right. I just use the auto detect features and then I clean up stuff after the fact. Okay, cool. So now that we have that first part done, we can start bringing in our spaceships. The way I set up my ships was, well, first of all, I got these models off of videocopilot.com. I will leave a link to those in the description below. They're completely free. Go get them. They're awesome. They will make a fine addition to your collection of 3D models. But yeah, after I got them, I just brought them into the scene, textured them up. They come with their own textures. All you're doing is plugging each individual texture into the principled BSDF shader, and it kind of just does the work for you. Okay, so one little detail that I did add to the ships that I realize now was not worth the effort because you can't tell, but I'm going to show you anyway. If you look at the windows, you can see that we have some nice grunge and scratches on them. Those did not come with the models. This is what the default texture kind of looks like. It's very clean and gross looking. It just doesn't look believable. But once you bring in the roughness, all of a sudden, things look so much more realistic. It looks like it's been weathered and torn. It's seen some battle. It just looks so much better. I did that to both the TIE Fighter and the X-Wing. Like I said, it's a detail that made no difference, I think. But I feel better knowing that it's there. Okay, cool. So after I set up the ships, now we have to make them fly, because who wants to watch ships just sit on the ground? No, they have to do something super cool. All I did was create a curve. So the way this is going to work is we're going to tell the ships to start at one point of the curve and then end at another point of the curve. You know, you're just shaping the curve to match the movement that you want. I was always watching the camera motion to make sure that the curve went in the right direction of where I wanted the ships to go. And then from there, we just select our ships and we add in a follow path constraint. You're just keyframing the offset. You're telling it, okay, at the beginning start at 0, and then at the end be at -100, which would be the end point of the curve. One thing you're gonna wanna do too is set the keyframes, or the offset keyframes, set those animation keyframes to be linear, because by default they're set at easy ease, but you're gonna see that those don't look natural. If you do easy ease, it'll look like the ships are going to start slow, and then go normal speed, and then they're gonna slow down again. And that just does not look natural. You want the ships to look like they are consistently in motion and that they've been in motion for quite a while. So to fix that, just set both the keyframes to linear, and then that way it will have this consistent look of motion, which will feel and look a lot more natural and believable. But yeah, I basically just did that to both ships. It also helps too that if you animate the rotation of the ships as they're following the curve, so you know, as the TIE fighter is turning its direction, I'm also gonna rotate it towards that direction to make it seem like, you know, the pilot is leaning over, and it just creates this more realistic look. But that's pretty much it. Everything that we did right here is essentially what we're going to do in the second part of a shot. The only difference is we're adding a few extra gimmicks, like the explosion and the lasers, which really are not that complicated. I'll get to those in just a second, but as a whole, this is kind of what the main process looks like for this particular video. So let's look over at the second part of a shot, the second track that I was talking about earlier. Okay, so here is the second part of the shot. It's where the camera has finally rotated and it's settling down, and we're looking at the completely different view with different setting and everything. But basically, the ships are gonna fly by from the top of the view, and we're going to see them fly off. At least the X-Wing, the TIE fighter, is gonna get blown up. So this whole part of a shot is essentially the same thing. There's just a few extra details that we added in order to pull this part off. So for one, instead of having both ships follow the same curve, I made two separate curves. That way I could have the X-Wing fly off while the TIE fighter gets blown up or whatever. So that is one difference. We have two curves instead of one. We're also having the X-Wing shoot lasers out of its guns. The way I'm pulling off the lasers for the X-Wing is I'm just making this tiny little plane and I'm scaling it way down. I'm putting it next to the gun right where it would be firing from. And then I'm setting that to be a particle emitter. I made this really quick laser mesh, and I just told the plane to emit that at the right moment. And I'm just setting up different particle emitters, telling them to go off at the right moment to create the idea that there are lasers being shot. The next big thing in this shot is, of course, the explosion. So to do the explosions, I used the Chaos add-on. I'll also leave a link to that in the description below, so you can go and check that out if you want. It's basically an add-on that just creates explosions for you, so that you don't have to set up all the smoke settings and all that. I just used that so I could whip something up really quick. So in the video, it looks like there's one explosion, but I really have two, and that's because I needed the explosion to be big enough so that I could hide the TIE fighter disappearing behind the explosion. I would have had the TIE fighter like fall into a ton of different pieces, but when I made this video, I was on a tight deadline. It was the night before May 4th, and I had to get the video done by that day. It's super important. So the explosion, okay, after I finished rendering everything, you have to keep in mind too that I was stressing out last minute trying to get this all done. So you have to set up a domain, a bounding box for where you're going to have the explosion. And the explosion is going to take place within that area. I realized after rendering everything, which took a few hours by the way, that my bounding box was a little too small and it actually cut off the edges of the explosion. You can actually see it in the video. But like I said, it was a tight deadline. It was like the morning of May 4th and I was still trying to get everything together so I could post it on that day. And baking smoke simulations takes a little too long to wait for that, and then having to re-render everything, it just wasn't worth it. So I told myself to just leave it and move on. And that's what I did. And I was kind of hoping that no one would notice. Unfortunately, there were some people. But yeah, that's pretty much it for what made this second part of a shot so big. If you're ever getting to a point where you're making a scene like this, where you're having ships fly around, you want them to do something a little exciting, try spinning. It's a good trick. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. After that, I rendered it, and then I jumped over to After Effects to do some minor compositing, a little playing with the color and adding noise to get things right. And remember, we split our shot into two different parts. So for the middle section, I actually am speeding that up. Because if you play it normally, the camera turn happens a little too slow, and you would expect the ship to be way past the camera view by the time it gets there. So I had to go in there and do a little time manipulation with the middle portion of our shot to make it seem like that part was a lot faster than it was. And those are just some of the invisible effects that you probably don't notice when you're watching a video like this. But yeah, that's pretty much the process. That's pretty much the whole thing. I know this is a little different, but I felt like doing something a little different. I have to find ways to upload more frequently. I mean, have you seen our upload schedule? So let me know if this is the kind of stuff that you're kind of interested in, maybe show you more processes that I do for some of my other stuff. But yeah, that was pretty much it. That's a little walkthrough of how I made that video. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, please like and subscribe. Do it! But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.